Hello there, everybody. Hopefully you can see us and hear us clearly. My name is Andrew Sinclair. I'm the Business Development Manager for Total Water Solutions. And with me today is Michael Dean, who's our Legionella Manager. Just a couple of kind of house rules before we get started. So everybody's on mute. That's just from experience. If people start trying to talk at the same time, it gets a bit clunky. What you'll see is it's generally on the right hand side of your screen. There'll be a little orange arrow and it'll have a couple of little boxes in there. One of them that's in there is for questions. So if you wouldn't mind, if you've got questions throughout the webinar, please do ask them. They'll come through to me, and at the end of the presentation, what I'll do is I'll ask Michael the questions on your behalf. If for any reason you've got a really burning question that you want to ask in person, just let me know that in the questions, and hopefully I should be able to unmute your mic, and it should all work swimmingly. At the end of the presentation, there'll be a quick questionnaire. There's only 4 questions on there. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, that's really, really helpful and kind of allows us to evolve and hopefully bring you more content that'll bring you some value. And other than that, oh yes, we also have you'll see on that screen on your right hand side, there's a one for handouts. Some people might have been on the last webinar that we did. We've put the flushing guidance, and there's a log attached to that as well. Really good little bit of information there, and a handy bit of kit for logging stuff, which I'm sure Michael will talk about in a bit more detail. So to no further ado, I will give Michael control of the screen, and then Michael can take us through the presentation. Wonderful. I'll leave it.
Thank you for that, Andrew. So I've been asked to do a presentation to you today on basically safe flushing during the lockdown. So contents for today's presentation, we're going to talk about the current risk. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about the legislative framework, not too much detail there though. The water hygiene mantra, what I certainly live by. Preparing buildings for use, and the 2 different types of flushes, the hygienic flush and the cleansing flush. And system disinfections, system sampling, take-home message, and at the end, as Andrew has mentioned, if you've got any questions for me, then we can go through them then. Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to start talking about mouth. It's just basically been used within a week. For healthcare, it's twice per week. So when we're talking about little used outlets, we talk about any outlets. That could be a tap, it could be a wash and base, it could be a toilet, it could be anything that's not used within the on a weekly basis. So that becomes it's defined little used. Okay, so what I say, what's the problem? Well, the issue here is stagnation. So it's well documented that biofilms will form in pipes and fittings, and Legionella numbers will increase. There's lots of information on the internet about biofilms that form within pipes. It's basically like a gelatinous structure in which Legionella bacteria will live. Basically they will live and reproduce, and any disinfections that we do, if you've got that biofilm on the inside of your pipes, then potentially your Legionella bacteria will be protected from the disinfectants. So yeah, biofilms are not good, and they will form when the water is not turned over. Stagnation. Okay, at the moment we're getting warmer. Certainly here in the east of England, it was nearly 27 degrees yesterday, so it's getting warmer, and that makes the problems worse. Okay. So bacteria will love that warmer weather, and they'll start to reproduce at really quite a high level. So less usage again means increased chance of control measures. Control measures, yeah, comfortable with that phrase. Talk about it in a bit more detail later on. But keeping your hots hot and your colds cold, yeah. So if you're not using it, then your colds can potentially get hot, and your hots can potentially get cold, and then you get in the danger zone, and then that's when we get bacteria growing. And with less people in the buildings, less people to report it, okay? It's more of an issue. Also reduce opportunities to get remedial works done. So if you do have issues, many contractors are still under a furloughed, so you're still going to potentially could struggle getting plumbers and remedial works finished because there's just not a lot of resource of labour to get the works done. So that exacerbates the issues. And I think it's key, and you'll hear me say this a few times during this presentation, that those recovering from COVID-19 are likely to be more susceptible to Legionella disease. There's still an awful lot to be learned about COVID-19. However, we're quite confident, or we're quite aware that those are suffering or recovering from it are more susceptible to Legionella disease. It is, after all, a lung issue, the same as Legionella disease is as well. Okay. So we're going to talk, I'm not going to go into great depth today, but I just want to highlight a couple of things about legislation. I'm sure we're all fully aware of this, but I think it's just a nice brief refresher for us. So I think it's fair to say that the immediate demands of the pandemic has taken the attention off water hygiene. Okay. We've, as a business, have been in communication with the Health and Safety Executive, and they've been quite clear, and there'll be no dispensations from the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 due to the pandemic. So I think if any of us are looking at it and say, well, I've not done this, I've not done that, or how do you expect to do that? There's a pandemic on, that it won't wash, unfortunately. So we want to be mindful of the fact that we need to be aware that the rules and the regulations are still there, and there still will be adhered to. On the positive, upbeat view, there are some really good information and sources out there. So there's ACOT and the LA, so again, they come from the Health and Safety Executive, so they're available online. And I refer to the HSG 274 Part 2 all the way through this presentation. So that again is a free download. There's some really good sections on there regarding commissioning of buildings and mothballing. So again, that's a useful document to have. New documents have kind of reared their heads over this last few weeks, and again, been really, really useful. This ESGLI, the European Study Group for Legionella Infections, is a fantastic document that's available online for free download. Please have a review of that, have a read of it. There's also stuff, specialist advice for likes of dentist surgeons as well on there, which is really, really quite useful. Websites are always a good source of information. The LCA, the Legionella Control Association, have some really good downloads on there, really good information, as the Health and Safety Executive. And Department of Education as well, always a good source of information. Maybe you might have seen the leaflet for the document that's been circulating recently regarding recommission of school buildings. There was a little bit about the Legionella control in there, which we might find of use. And of course, Total Water Solutions, our website has a wealth of information and things on there. And like I say, feel free to contact us if you need any more support, any more information or any help. We're always here for you. And webinars, I think the pandemic has been the era of webinars. I think it's been the era of quizzes as well. So I think you're here today, so thank you very much. So make use of them. A lot of them are downloadable, and you can watch them again at a time that suits you and pass them around. Okay, so I don't want to talk too much more about it, but the take home is basically that the rules still stand. So the Health and Safety Executive are quite clear on that. So I touched on it briefly before, and this is like within the department. So if you live by those rules from a water hygiene perspective, you will not go far wrong, and potentially I'll be out of a job, but that's a conversation for a different day. So colds, anything under 20 degrees for cold temperature for your taps. Hots should be stored at over 60 degrees and out of your taps at less than over 50 degrees. So anything in between, Legionella bacteria will love growing anything between 20 and 45 degrees. So that's what we call the danger zone. And keep it moving. Well, we're talking about flushing today. Flushing is moving the water. So all you're doing when you're flushing taps is you're reducing the time the bacteria has available for it which to grow. That's all you're doing. And hopefully you're putting the bacteria down the sink where it belongs. Okay, so keep your hots hot, keep your colds cold, and keep it moving. That's a water hygiene mantra. So, and to continue, we cannot simply unlock the doors and everybody crackling negligent. We can't do that. There has to be steps in place that we fulfil to make the buildings safe. Again, that goes back to the Health and Safety Work Act, to making sure that the buildings and the water systems are safe to the users, the employees, and guests alike. So flushing is a useful tool in assisting and maintaining buildings, and will reduce the burden in recommissioning once the lockdown eases. So flushing is a useful tool. That's something that I want to get across today. One thing we may not be aware of is that water quality may have generally deteriorated. So I'm talking about Legionella today, okay? But water, if it's sat in a pipe, it may not be classed as wholesome anymore. It may actually smell slightly. It may suffer from taste and odour issues. You might get that TCP taste in the water from water fittings such as hoses, flexible hoses and the likes. So again, fittings might have deteriorated over time, and you may get cloudiness, you may get all sorts of things. So water may not be wholesome. Flushing will help that, get rid of that problem. So before we recommission buildings and get them ready for use, we have to categorise them. And the way we categorise them is by the following criteria. I've just highlighted 4 there, but it is quite a complicated subject. I'll talk you through it now. So simple systems, they're the easy ones. I don't like the phrase, but they're the low-hanging fruit. So those are those with no or limited storage, i.e. the mains only, or that have small, less than 15 litres, so point of use, or under single water heater, small ones, and no showers. So they are classed as simple systems. I've referred to it already, HSG 274, there's a good section there, and definition of simple systems is quite clear in there. So if it's not a simple system, it must be something else, okay? So that would be systems that have stored water, or water heaters over 15 litres, and or showers. Showers, because of the aerosol generation, elevates the risk dramatically, and therefore you must have different control measures before you recommission your buildings. Also take into consideration whether the building is partly or fully closed. Might have many clients that parts of the buildings are closed, and other parts buildings are completely closed. If you're in domestic housing, you might have communal areas at the moment which are all cordoned off because of the social distancing. However, the individual flats and premises, parts of the premises must still be used. So there's all sorts of things in the middle as well. I think the other key thing as well is to think about susceptibility of the end users. So I hope we're all comfortable with the term susceptibility when it comes to Legionella disease. So typically it's males that contract it, over 45, believe it or not. It's, males 3 to 1 catch it, or more likely to catch it. Anybody that's got any underlying health complaints, typically could be including those recovering from COVID. It could be anybody that's alcoholic or diabetic or underlying health issues such as kind of recovering from cancer or anything like that. So they're susceptible individuals. So anywhere that ticks in those boxes, your system potentially is not classed as simple, and it should have a more stringent method of recommissioning. And usage is really important, as we've touched on already. If your water is not used and turned over, then you can get bacterial growth on there. Okay, so we must factor that into the way we recommission buildings. If buildings have been mothballed, then potentially you could have a different outcome as if they are used or flushed. The only real definitive answer is to defining usage, or measuring usage, I should say, is looking at the meter reads. It's not always easy, but it's a definitive. Yes, you can turn around and say, well, usually on a month I use so many cubic meters, and over the last few weeks I've used this. So you can actually do a definitive calculation of how much water usage you've got. That's the best way of doing it. But if in doubt, then I would suggest that a lot of your buildings are simply not getting the usage that they used to have. And then kind of the other thing as well to think about is the priority of when the buildings need to go back into use. Now, having dealt with many clients over the last few weeks on recommission of buildings, I'm aware that this the rate or the priority for putting them back into use varies a lot depending on the different stakeholders that get involved. So I'm aware that changes literally by the hour, but it's something to bear in mind. And it's a hierarchy of when you want your buildings put back into use. So something else to think about when you're talking about recommissioning buildings is the risk factors. So many of us, well, probably all remember Boris's television presentation when he went through all his news flash and said that we're all going to basically go into lockdown tomorrow. He was very rushed. I think some of us thought it would happen, but never. I don't think everybody was really ready to shut down as fast as we did. So if you've got any that have been incorrectly mothballed, so you might have sites that are drained down, or you might have sites that have got do not, are not labelled up as do not use, and they potentially should be taken into consideration for when you're doing your recommissioning. Another thing to think about as well is rural sites. We have quite a lot of sites that are in parks, public toilets, community, but on long runs, effectively in the middle of nowhere. So these do pose a little bit more of a problem because the mains distribution pipework may be well over 20 degrees before it even reaches the building, simply because of the distance it's had to travel, and then it will pick up ambient temperature heat gain. So that's something to think about. And again, we'll put more of a challenge on your flushing regimes. One thing as well you need to be aware of is site familiarity. Now, I think we all like to be relatively confident that we know the buildings that we oversee, but unfortunately the reality of it is we don't know all our sites intimately. You may have the hosing and tap around the back in the yard that you didn't know was there or has not been used for so long, it's slipped out of people's minds. Or you might have, I don't know, the woodcutter's shed in the woods I put there So these will be the sites that unfortunately will bite us. So be prepared to really open your mind and have a walk around and think, have you got all these sites into consideration? And if you've got contractors on sites that are recommissioning your buildings, make sure they're aware of exactly which ones and where all the outlets are so that we don't have any mistakes. So flushing, again, it's just putting it back into context. Where does this fit into the bigger picture? So this is an infographic that we've produced and put on our website. So again, it's free to download for you. But this again just hones in on the whole building. The whole building is closed down. We're now talking about flushing, which is the latter part of that flow chart. So basically what we're saying is it's been closed down, potentially parts of it, well, it's not getting used at all. If it's a simple system for recommission, you may be able to flush it. Remember the definition of simple systems. If it's a larger system, then, as we've mentioned before, if you're doing flushing on a weekly basis, then that will ease the burden on the recommissioning later down the line. So that's for whole buildings. You might have part buildings closed down, which we've already touched on. So this might be an area, a kitchenette areas, for instance, in a sheltered accommodation. If that's all cordoned off because of social distancing rules, then think about flushing those sorts of areas. Should be done on a weekly basis. And that again will ease the burden once it's fully to be brought online. So I'm going to draw your attention now to the different kinds of flush. When we talk about flushing, I know with me instantly, what do you think of? Just turning on a tap? Okay, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So there are two different kinds of flush. So they are defined, or they're basically termed the hygiene flush and the cleansing flush. So what I'd like to do now is just refer you to a little bit of safety. Remember the safety, the whole point of this is a health and safety issue and a big hygiene issue. But it's important with any control measures not to endanger the staff who are completing their tasks. So I'd like you to take a think, or take a moment to think about who you are asking to complete these tasks. If you're doing this in-house, then that's absolutely fine. But please think about their health and safety. So you could be potentially exposing individuals to aerosols if it's not done correctly, and also social distancing. So that's the Legionella, that's the water hygiene perspective that you need to think about. But also think about COVID-19. So remember that social distancing for all the staff and all members doing this flushing, wear appropriate PPE. So that might be gloves, that might be masks. Remember, keep 2 meters away from people and continue the hand washing regime. But so it's just a note today. It's just to think about who you're doing it. So if you have anybody that's more susceptible than others, then please don't get them involved in flushing. And remember always to keep and maintain records for any activities. This is safe critical work, so it has to be documented. And the all added shows if you haven't written your name against it, you've not done it. So let's talk about the hygienic flush. So the principal purpose of the hygiene is to simulate water use where it's not usually happening. So again, you might have a building that's partly used, partly closed down, or partly, yeah. So it could be it's used to simulate water use, and it reduces the volume of water sitting idle in the system, which would otherwise encourage bacterial growth. So again, as I've already mentioned, all you're doing is voiding the water down the drain, and that should be the bacteria going down the drain with it. It should be done as routine on all outlets that have not been used on a weekly basis, all right, or twice per week in healthcare. So regardless of lockdown and COVID, I'd like to think that all outlets that are not used on a weekly basis are routinely hygienically flushed. That's something I'd like to think about, and that goes for domestic house as well. If you've got people away, then you've got a spare, an ensuite that's not getting used, or you've got a utility room in your house that's not getting used on a weekly basis, then please flush it. Bacteria do not differentiate between the domestic house where you live and the workplace. The hygienic flush is not recommended as a means of recommissioning water systems. However, as I mentioned, its use will reduce the level of recommissioning required. So that's a very high level of the hygienic flush. So how do we do it? So we basically start off by measuring the start temperature with a temperature probe. We measure the end temperature. So the end temperature should be the temperature of the supplying asset. So for instance, when you're in a day like today, when you're flushing a mains tap, cold mains, so you turn the tap on. If the building has not been used or tap's not been used in a week, the chances are you're going to pick ambient heat up from the building. So when you initially turn the tap on, you're going to be quite high. I've had seen up to 38, 40 degrees before on the hots, especially if they're covering over from central heating pipes on long runs. So turn it on, measure that initial temperature, and then keep the tap on, and then just get your temperature probe, and you'll see it drop. That'll drop to the supplying asset temperature. So on the mains, maybe today it might be 16, 17 degrees. You will get your eye in as to what that temperature would be. If it's hot, there might be the clarifier might be running at kind of, the outlets might be coming out 50, 52, 53, something like that. So again, that's your baseline. Bear that in mind. Then take how long it takes to achieve this temperature. So if it's on a long old run, remember, ideally, for temperature control, your hot should be reaching the temperature within a minute and cold's 2 minutes. However, if the building's not being used, it might take longer than that. So let's put that aside, but it's just as a bit of fact. But measure how long it takes, because there might be outlets surrounding that particular fitting that are used. So all you're interested in is doing is removing the water, avoiding that water off that asset within the system, and not removing all of the water within the system. So if you're on a run, and a long run, all you're doing is voiding that water within the run. Once you've done it, you update the logbook. So I've said this a few times, if you've not signed your name against it, you've not done it. So we touched on safety before, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it now, okay? So if you are about to do a hygienic flush on showers, then the first thing you need to think about is reducing aerosol generation. Thinking about it, this shower's potentially sat there for 2 or 3 weeks. It's not turned over. Yeah? Anything over a week, it's been sat there stagnant. There is more than likely a chance you're going to get an elevated bacterial growth in there. Certainly if you've got a hose like this one, the picture you're seeing now, if that's in a kind of a U shape, which it will do because it will drop at the bottom, you are going to get bacteria sitting in that pipework that will generate all sorts of, well, nasties in there, and you do not want to be the person at the end of that who gets a mouthful of it. So how do you do that? First things first is remove the risk, okay? Basic principles of health and safety and risk assessments, remove the risk. So take that off, unscrew the shower head, and as soon as you can see the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that the water is voiding from the pipe, and it's not creating any aerosols whatsoever, and you're reducing that risk, okay? If you can't do that, and sometimes they can be a little bit stubborn, then the next best thing is to put it in a bucket of water on your left-hand side, as you can see, and then that's going to reduce the aerosols as well. And just a reminder for those who have done it, just remember to keep hold of your little rubber or your neoprene washer, because you'll find that if you don't, it'll go down the plug hole, and that'll be most frustrating because it'll weep forevermore until it's replaced. So how do you do it then? So once you remove the shower head, then you're ready to flush. So turn the hot and cold suppliers on. So it's kind of hot. I do the hot first. Crank it around to hot, and all I would do is just open up the tap or the valve a little bit, so you just get the first slug of water out. I would say softly, just a little bit out, so you're not creating aerosol, the splash. I run it for you can run it for 2 or 3 minutes until you feel that it's run up to temperature, and again run to cold. Again, so it should come out of your supplying acid temperature on the cold. And then you can mix it and give it a good old blast through once you've got the first slug of water out. One thing to think about as well is if you've got a fixed shower head, as quite often we do, it doesn't look particularly glamorous, but because they're quite difficult to remove the shower heads, all we do is use a plastic bag. So you can put a plastic bag over the shower head, cut the corner off, turn the water on, and you would vastly reduce the aerosols that are coming out of the plastic bag. And it'll just basically trickle down. So I know you can get proprietary bags, for want of a better word, to do this with, but it's just the principles apply. So yeah, you can think about that. So that's it for showers with a higher risk because of the aerosols. Next is a bit less risk, and this is for taps. So this, you've got a picture of a mixer tap on your right hand side. I'm sure you're familiar with them. So all you need to do for that is to take it to some same principle. Take it down to the hot. So again, you take it around to the hot, and then you are slowly open up the tap to release the water out. And as we said before about the temperature control, take your thermometer and then measure that temperature on the hot until it reaches a supplying asset. So again, it should be a minimum of 50 degrees, and time that and put that in your logbook and your flushing sheet as well. Okay. And again, same for the cold. Once that's done, that's up to temperature. Whisk the handle around to the cold on the other side, and then take that and then measure temperature and measure how long it takes and then go from there. Again, once that first slug of water's gone, you can open up and get a bit, open it full bore eventually, so you can really give it a blast through. Note the time taken, as again I've mentioned that before. The time taken is just indication how much stagnant water is in that pipework. So you're efficiently flushing and not removing unnecessary water. So once we've done this, once this act has been done, then it needs to be recorded in the logbook. So we have a flushing record there. I think Andrew's mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. These are all free downloads, so please go onto our website and help yourself if you've not got copies already. Take a copy of that and use it in your own logbooks if you haven't already. And again, just mentioned this twice before, 3 times already. You're not signing your name against it, you've not done it. So please sign your name against it and keep on top of your records and keep them for 5 years. There you go, all done. So next we're on the cleansing flush. So we talked about the hygienic flush, and now we're talking about the cleansing flush. So the cleansing flush is a little bit more in depth. It's used for recommissioning simple systems. We talked about simple systems before, but just as a refresher, if you're not sure, go download HSG 274 Part 2, and it will give you a bit more information. But a simple system is basically those without any storage, hot or cold, and it doesn't have any showers in there, okay? So you are limited with how many buildings you could apply the cleansing flush to, but there are some out there. So it's widely documented, we've talked about this before, that stubborn biofilms may have accumulated in pipes and water fittings, okay? So the cleansing flush, the whole point of this is to void those biofilms off. It's basically I put in there, it's the hygienic flush may not have the oomph to shift it, the cleansing flush will. So how do we give the flush more oomph? Well, we're reducing flow restrictors. So that might be the case that you've got tap inserts. You've all seen those probably, and I've got them in my wash on basins upstairs. Basically, they just increase the kind of splashing effect from your tap to reduce the water flow. It just gives the effect without wasting the water. But the downside of that is they do restrict water flow, and that's going to reduce the impact of the cleansing flush. So they should all be removed. Any valves should be in a fully open position. So again, if you've got any boiler fixtures around, make sure they're all opened up because they would restrict flow. And flow to operated valves as well can be quite restrictive. So they need to be fully opened, so held open to ensure the cleaning of any particulates from the pipework. It could be the case that if you can't get a decent flow out of them, they are removed. It's a bit of plumbing work, but it might be necessary. So that's the very high level for cleansing flush, okay? So it's just a more oomph than the hygienic flush. And all we're doing there is reducing restrictions by tap inserts or float operated valves and basically letting that water belt out to remove biofilms. And it's, as the name would suggest, it's more of a cleansing action. So it has to be a considered process. It's more likely to be involved in a simple hygienic flush. Think of a hygienic flush as one that you do on a weekly basis for maintenance. This is one that you would do as a recommissioning action. Some systems may be close to definition of low risk, so you may have some limited storage in there. But again, look at your risk assessment, look at the control measures, and make a decision. Or if in doubt, talk to a specialist for a little bit more advice, or water hygiene consultant to see really what the best approach may be for that particular system. But again, as always, on completion, you must have a documentation provided to make sure that you can see and demonstrate due diligence and that you've done the work in the correct fashion. So we talked about the 2 different types of flushing. They're not the be all and end all. There may be a case where you have to do a system disinfection. So I cast your mind back to the beginning of the presentation. Water systems that will require disinfection, this is for recommissioning, are those that are not simple systems. So those with stored water, water treated over 15 litres, or showers, or those with susceptible individuals. So this is for recommissioning. However, effectiveness of the disinfection will be increased by flushing the system first. So whenever you're doing a system disinfection, it's a good process and a good practice to flush it first, because then you're removing the bio load before you start putting the disinfectant in. And disinfectant work a lot more effectively because it's got less to go at, so it'll go further basically. Again, the process of system disinfection is well documented, so I'm not going to go into it today. It's not the purpose of today's presentation. My point I'm trying to get across today is that a system disinfection may be required on top of a system flushing to get your building recommissioned, depending on how complicated it is. One thing I'd like to get across today, though, however, is the system disinfections are not guaranteed to be 100% effective. If any of you are commissioning disinfections for your buildings, please be aware that sometimes we'll do a disinfection and it might be 3 or 4 times before we can get it to work 100%. You might have an area of really low flow that the disinfectant's not going to travel to. You might have dead legs behind ceiling voids that the disinfectant can't reach. And then once we flush the disinfectant out, the bacteria will reseal the system. So it might take 2 or 3 attempts to get it right. So please just be, it's just a plea from us that have to do the work that they're not always effective, and it's not a guarantee that once you've done your disinfection, you're good to go, okay? So system sampling, a few thought measure to samples in lieu of check to ensure that your control measures are and continue to work, okay? So they provide evidence and reassurance that the system is safe to use. So it can be useful after actions such as cleansing, flushing and disinfection. Again, a validation, it's all working. Samples should be taken 2 to 7 days after disinfection, okay? So once you've done your disinfection, what we would do is we'd leave your system after it's been flushed out, the chemical out of it, and then we would leave it, and then we'd return usually about a week after we've disinfected. Now, the whole purpose of that is to give any sublethally damaged bacterial cells a chance to regrow. If you were to take a sample immediately after disinfection, the chances are you would get potentially a false negative, because all you basically kill the bacteria, or the majority of the bacteria off once you've sampled, you're not going to get much to grow. However, if you leave it for up to a week, then these bacteria get a chance to regroup and regrow. And then once you take a sample, you get a really good idea whether that disinfection has been effective or not. So it's done for a purpose, okay? Ideally, sample locations and sample methodologies should be carefully considered. I know I do quite a lot of that. It's looking through assets and schematic drawings and taking a real educated guess as to the best place to take your samples from. Quite often these are areas of high concern, so they might be from end of shower runs are always a good place. So just to check that the high risk areas are physically, you're getting a good idea of bacterial background levels in there. Sampling, so we're talking a little bit more about rapid techniques to sample. They have a place. Remember the limitations regarding what positives you're going to get from them. Quite often they're only good for serogroup 1. So serogroup 2 to 14 of species will not be identified. So just because you've had a clear on there doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't got other bacteria species within your Legionella bacteria species within your system. So they do have a place, and we do use them, but just be mindful of the caveats and just be mindful of how useful they actually are. So bear that in mind when you use them, okay? So the other thing to think about as well as with sampling is when you take the samples, like I said, you're going to wait a week before you take them. Sample results might take 2 weeks before you get them back to you from the lab. So potentially you've got 3 weeks of water systems where you cannot effectively use them to their full capacity minimum. So if you've got, so basically waiting for sample results, hygiene flushing maybe should be undertaken to prevent degradation of the water quality. So in essence, while you're waiting for the samples to be released on a weekly basis, it's a really good idea is to continue flushing all the outlets on a weekly basis, document it so that the system is up and running. The idea is that if you're not using your system for 3 weeks and you let it sit while you're waiting for the sample results, those sample results will probably well be indicative of the water systems as it stands now. So to keep on top of it by doing regular weekly samples. And again, if you're costing anything to do with recommissioning, that's something you need to think about as well. You can do it yourself or get your contractor to do it, but there will be cost implications of that, of course. One thing that we're becoming more comfortable with and using more often now is filter shower heads. So as I've mentioned, potentially your building is going to be out of action for 3 weeks. If you've got showers, that means you can't use you can't use showers for 3 weeks. If you've got wash hand basins, you should be absolutely fine. Normal taps, it should be fine because you have limited aerosol generation. However, shower heads are the issues because they're going to generate aerosols. So any other outlets you should be able to use immediately after disinfection, unless you've got really severely susceptible individuals on the end. However, if you've got shower heads on there, no, under no circumstances you should be using showers until you've had a clear suite of results from your laboratory. In the meantime, we have been using filter shower heads with some success, or great success. Basically, once installed, you can use that shower immediately and then they will entrap all the bacteria within the filter head themselves, and they will keep them there and kill the bacteria off within the filter head, and it means that the end user is not going to get a lungful of it, which is fantastic. However, they're not an engineering solution because they only last for 70 days. But at least it means you'll be able to immediately use your showers, and they are quite expensive as well. But it's something to think about. It's a useful tool in your armoury. So coming to the end of it now. So I'd just like to reiterate the points in a take-home message summary. So the take-home message is the water hygiene mantra. I hope that the phrase rolls off your tongue moving forward. So keep your hots hot, your colds cold, and keep it moving. Okay. So hots, I hope you all know that now. You should be reaching your taps over 50, stored over 60, and your colds should be coming out your tap at less than 20 flushing. So keeping it moving is basically voiding off the bacteria down your drain. So flushing is a useful tool in both simulating use and in some specific cases for reconditioning buildings. For outlets underused, simulate use by using a hygiene flush on all outlets. Now you've seen the slides on how we do it, and that's the way to do it. It's taken from HSG 274, and record your findings. So depending on the water system design, recommissioning options include, so you could recommission your building with a cleansing flush. However, that's only for simple buildings with no storage or showers. Validation samples would still be recommended. I'll still take some samples. Disinfections, wait until your results are released from your laboratory for disinfections. Okay, so again, just basically contact your hygiene water hygiene provider if you need more advice on that. But again, effectively, if you haven't got a simple system, you're going to have to do disinfection. So once recommissioned, if buildings are not used immediately, continue to hygiene flush weekly and take samples. So another thing to think about as well is if they're not used for extended periods of time, i.e. buildings after being recommissioned, then potentially the disinfection process will it could be have to be done again. Okay, you might be back to square one again. So once you started the ball rolling with the recommissioning process, it's really good to get your buildings used hopefully straight away. If not, you can buy yourself some time by doing weekly hygienic flushes. But again, if that's not complete and that's not viable, then potentially you're going to have to go back to mothballing your buildings and start to do the process again. Okay. I hope that's okay with everybody.
We've got a couple of questions that have come through. I think it might have popped up a question here. So it says, I'm considered vulnerable, but I'm not shielding. Should I avoid water flushing? I'm shortly to return to the office, and this would normally be within my remit, even if I wear a mask.
I think you should, providing the issue I have is if people don't do it correctly. So if you do it with the methodology that I've done, specifically highlighted there, so it's creating aerosols, then you should be absolutely fine. So I think you should be fine. The main area of concern is showers. So if you don't feel 100% comfortable doing it, then give it to somebody else. Let them do it. But the main concern I would always have is with the showers and aerosol generation. Okay. So when it comes to aerosol generation from showers, as I've said in the presentation, take the shower head off, and then you can basically flush it directly down the drain with the shower hose, and then you should dramatically reduce your chances of picking up any aerosols whatsoever. But generally, I think you should be fine. But if you are not 100% happy, then I think you will be well within your rights, and it'd be reasonable to get somebody else to do that for you. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. The next one is, do you have to open all the outlets at the same time when flushing?
No. No, you can do it on a no. Absolutely not. You can go around, do it on a phase, do it an outlet by time if you want. That's absolutely fine. So I think I would recommend you doing that because I've seen it done before where all outlets are done at once, and then some are certainly forgotten in one end of the building, and you might get complaints from the people below when you see water going through the ceilings. So I wouldn't recommend they do everything at once. No. If you are comfortable at managing that, then you can, but I wouldn't take it a chance. If you can do an outlet at a time, then I would do it like that, and it keeps the paperwork easier as well. Once you can do one outlet, record the paperwork, where the location is, how long you flushed it for, and go from there, give you a better picture. So I would recommend doing them individually.
Okay. Sorry, the person who asked the first question said thank you. We don't have any showers, so that probably minimises the risk a lot and probably takes a bit of pressure off the mind. So that's great.
Happy days.
And then the last one I've got so far is just sort of, would it be worth sort of cleaning the ends of the taps after flushing during this time?
Absolutely, and one thing I'm expecting as well, and I think the water company will get a lot of this, is people when the flushing taps have not been used for a while, you will get an element of I want to say slime. It doesn't sound very nice, but it pretty much is that. It's the biofilm that you will get, and also you get quite a lot of black growth, moles and stuff going around. Some moles that go around the end of the tap. So yeah, it would be a good idea to remove the tap inserts anyway and give them a good. You can do it even in bleach, to be fair. Provided you do it safely, you can take the tap inserts out, give them a good dose in bleach, give them a rinse out, then return them, because otherwise you might get, if it's not you, the other end users complaining, you're going to get slime and brown and black bits coming out of the taps, and the water's not safe to drink and all this. So you might preempt a few problems by doing that proactively before letting people use the system. So it's a really good question. So I hope that's helped.
Brilliant, excellent. There hasn't been any more questions come through, so we'll draw this to a close. You might have seen in the chat box, I put a link in there to the website and our COVID-19 page. On that page, there's a link to what we've just called helpful links. So that includes all of the relevant updates that we've been receiving as a business around from the LCA, which is sort of our kind of governing body, the HSE and the European Study Group for Legionella infection. And what I've done is I've quickly nipped on as we were doing the presentation, and I've added a link for L8 and HSG 274. And it's got all three parts in there, but the free downloads off the website, so it's well worth going on there and getting bits and pieces downloaded and just having a refresh. There are some specific guidances that have been released as well through those bodies. Some are to do with care homes, some are to do with the NHS. I think there's a dental one on there as well, I think, Michael, if I'm not mistaken, as well as some sort of general guidance around kind of what we would kind of consider like office buildings and things of that nature. Again, there'll be a questionnaire afterwards. If you wouldn't mind filling it in, it really does help us out. And other than that, we hope you've enjoyed the presentation and gotten some real value out of it. And if you're interested in more, we are going to be releasing more webinars over the next couple of weeks. And we actually have one next Wednesday, 1:30 again, and that is to do with desktop audits around water efficiency. So thank you very much, and stay safe out there.